Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining us today. For most of you, maybe perhaps on your lunch hour. And welcome to our Cooley Community Conversation series. Easy for me to say on this St. Patrick's Day. My name is Paul Zelensky, and I'll be the facilitator for today's program. So we're in the midst of celebrating Women's History Month, this month of March, and our discussion today focuses on how far women have come in both the profession and in society as a whole. And today we're delighted to have Professor Renalia DuBose here to look back on her life and experiences to share her perspective on how far women have come. Professor DuBose has a long history in the education field. Before joining the WMU Cooley faculty in 2013, she was an adjunct professor at St. Leo University, the University of South Florida, and Hillsborough Community College. She served as an assistant superintendent for administration for Pasco County Public Schools. She was the director of training and staff development for Hillsborough County Public Schools, and senior director of training and benefits and professional development services for Orange County Public Schools. Additionally, she was the supervisor for teacher training, a principal intern, and taught for Hillsborough County Public Schools. And at WMU Cooley, Professor DuBose teaches Contracts 1 and 2, personal and professional responsibility, education law, and employment law. And if you've joined us in previous conversations, you know that we really enjoy the opportunity for people to ask questions of our guests today. And we encourage you to ask questions. You can do it one of two ways. You could put a question in the chat, or you could go ahead and unmute and ask a question directly to Professor DuBose. As you can tell, we'll be recording today's program. So if you're not speaking, please put your audio on mute. So let's get rocking and rolling here today by starting the conversation and with a short history from Google, compliments of Google. So if we look back in 1851, Sojourner Truth delivers her "Ain't I a Woman" speech. In 1869, Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton found the National Women's Suffrage Association. And in 1920, women won the right to vote through the 19th Amendment. In June of 1963, the Equal Pay Act passes under the John F. Kennedy's Commission on Status of Women. In 1971, Gloria Steinem, Bella Abzug, and Betty Friedan formed the National Women's Political Caucus. And interestingly, in 71 is also the time when Gloria Steinem founded the Ms. Magazine, which was really the first magazine that seriously addressed women's issues broadly defined, and in fact was the first in 1976 to feature the matter of domestic violence on its cover. In 1981, Sandra Day O'Connor becomes the first woman appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court. And you may remember in 83, Sally Ride became the first woman, an American woman in space on the tragic Challenger mission. In 2002, I remember this, Halle Berry becomes the first African-American woman to win the Oscar for Best Actress. And as we all know, most recently, Kamala Harris became the first woman and first woman of color to become Vice President of the United States. So as we were talking with Professor DuBose, getting ready for today's session, conversation, she wanted to start with the premise of understanding that life of a woman is different than life of a man, but women have come a long way. So Professor DuBose, why don't you take that from there?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Paul. Welcome to everybody that's here today. And I want to say a special welcome to my mom who's watching today and to one of my sisters. And so I'm delighted to have them join us today. Life is different for women. Some women don't want to hear that, but life is different for women. But different doesn't mean detriment. Different doesn't mean detriment. I've been married for 44 years, and I love my husband dearly, but we share one characteristic in common, and that's that both of us are Christians. But other than that, we're different. I am a wife, he's not. I am a mother, he's not. I'm a grandmother, he will never be a grandmother. I am a daughter. He will never be a daughter. I am a sister. He'll never be a sister. And I am a friend sister to lots of women. And so women are different. We walked a different path. And We've come a long way, but by no means have we arrived. By no means have we arrived. As Paul said, women entered this country in a different way. In 1776, with the Declaration of Independence, the forefathers declared that all men are created equal. Oddly enough, the word man did not enter the U.S. Constitution until after the Civil War. The women's suffrage movement, women's rights to get the opportunity to vote, was born out of the anti-slavery movement. In 1840, there was a big anti-slavery event in London, and Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Stanton, who were the mothers of women's suffrage, were attending, and they were not allowed to sit on the floor. They had to sit up in the balcony. And so they came back home, and 8 years later, they had their big first women's suffrage conference in Seneca Falls 8 years later. Frederick Douglass was one of the speakers, and Harriet Tubman attended. And so obviously they thought that since we have supported the anti-slavery movement, after the Civil War, we will all be given the right to vote. And the 13th Amendment outlawed slavery, and the 14th Amendment was the first time the word man or men entered the U.S. Constitution. Now, the Constitution was written in the late 1700s. The Civil Rights Amendments were added in the mid-1800s after the war in 1865, but it said men. And there was a split between the anti-slavery movement between the abolitionists and women's rights. Women then did not get the right to vote until 1920. We celebrated the centennial event this year. If you think about how far we've come, but you've got to remember that the United States was 150 years old before we even allowed women to vote. And we know what happened with the anti-slavery amendments with Jim Crow. A lot of those were wiped out, but women weren't given the right to vote until 1920, and African-American women were not given the right to vote until the mid part of 2000s. I remember my mom and my dad fighting for the rights of African-Americans to vote in Pensacola. And so we've only been actively pursuing our rights for 100 years, is what I need to say. So have we come a long way in 100 years? Yes, we have. But we would probably be further along if we were treated as equals at the birth of the nation rather than in 1920. Women make up more than 50% of the population today. And we have for most of our history, for all of our history, except the earlier years when many women did get on those nasty ships and sail to the New World, not very many. But we make up 51% of the population today. And I used to teach high school in the 70s, and I would always say to my girls, we make up over 50% of the population, but we're in charge of nothing. We make up over 50% of the population, but we're in charge of nothing. And a lot of that had to do with how late we were in learning to exercise our right to vote, our political power. It took from 1920 to 2021 to get a female vice president. To show you, it took us 100 years to get there. So we've come a long way, baby, but we got a long way to go. When we think of political power, women need to vote. And women need to vote on issues in ways that benefit us and our children. Let me talk for a minute about what happens to women in America today. Pay, equality of pay. The Equal Pay Act was a part of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. There was an equal pay amendment in it. And at that time, women made 59 cents for every dollar that men earned. In 2016, President Obama issued an executive order to address disparity in pay. But today, as we sit here, women earn 80 cents when you allow for all the other things, same job, same education. We earn 80 cents for every dollar that men earn. Think about what we could do with that 20%. That's quality child care. That's better health care. That's money so that our children don't have to take out student loans to go to college. Imagine how different your life would be if you lost 20% of your pay today. But that's where women are in the United States today. and we are disproportionately affected by the pandemic. Many women have had to give up their opportunity to further their career during the pandemic. And we'll talk about childcare and all of that later. In 2009, the Lilly Ledbetter Pay Act was passed. I'll tell you a little bit about Lilly Ledbetter. She worked for the Goodyear Corporation in Gadsden, Alabama from 1979 to 1998. Right before her retirement, somebody slipped her an anonymous note informing her that she made, after being a supervisor for almost 2 decades, in fact, for 2 decades, she made less than the incoming man in the same position. Think about that. And during her federal lawsuit, her boss said those men needed that pay to take care of their families. And Lilly Ledbetter said, but I'm a single mother. Who needs it more? And so what we know is that much of equal pay initiatives in this country don't move forward because we have a system of secrecy about pay. I wrote a law review article in 2017 entitled "Compliance Requires Inspection: The Failure of Gender Equal Pay Efforts in the United States." And so with the new Lilly Ledbetter legislation, what happened before that was, if you needed to prove that your pay was based on gender discrimination, you had to file within 180 days of when your pay was set. Well, how can you do that if you don't know what everybody else earns? And so the Lilly Ledbetter Act, which was the first piece of legislation that Barack Obama signed, basically stated, when you get paid a salary that's based on gender discrimination, every time you get that pay, the time clock starts over. So if I get paid Friday and my pay is based on discriminatory pay, the clock starts, 180 days starts. With Lilly Ledbetter, it would have started in 1979, but she didn't know it until 1998. So she reaped none of the benefits of that new legislation because her pay had ended. She had retired by this time. But now the pay starts over every time. And in the words of my husband, if you have trouble sleeping and you need a good sleeping pill, send me an email and I'll send this article to you. And according to him, it will put you to sleep instantly. But what it outlines is people that are a part of the Screen Actors Guild that find out that women, that they're making much less than their male counterparts when they're in the starring role. As recently as March 12, 2021, there was an article in the Tampa Tribune, USF Dean Faye Howard, this past week, filed a gender discrimination pay lawsuit against the University of South Florida. So it is still happening. And we ask ourselves, how do women make 80% less? Well, one way is that when they first come in, they're given a pay that's below what their male counterparts are earning. I'd like to switch now and talk a little bit about women in the law. Women in the law. I'll tell you up front that most of my data will come from our textbook, our PPR, Personal Professional Ethics textbook. But I want to give you some numbers to help you along. In 1940, 5.5% of the population, males, went to college. 3.8% of women went to college. In 1985, 23.1% of men attended In 1985, 23.1% of men attended college, 15.7% of women attended college. Listen to this statistic. In 2019, 36.6% of women attended college and 35.4% of men attended college. So we're going to college at a higher rate than men, but we earn 20% less than men. Let that soak in for a minute. We go to college more often and graduate more often, but we earn 20% less than men. So let's look at what happens to female lawyers, since this is a law school event. In the winter of 2015 was the first time that I taught the ethics class. And I remember at the end of the book, there was a section on women. So we talk about, have we come a long way? We're now able to vote. But when I first started teaching in 2015, the chapter on equity was the last chapter of the textbook. Today, it's the first chapter. So I've seen progress even at that. I mean, at the end of the textbook, you're trying to get people ready for exams and all that other stuff. You're not trying to, So now it's the first chapter in the book. Margaret Brett was the first woman to practice law in the United States in the 1600s, but she was from a wealthy family in England. She died in the 1600s, and no other woman practiced for 200 years. As late as the 1800s, we heard these statements in the U.S. Supreme Court. It is against the divine order of women to practice law, and their paramount destiny is wife and mother. Now, I'm the daughter of a preacher's wife, and my mother was a professional woman, and people thought, oh, the pastor's wife works. Well, the pastor's wife did work, and we had a nanny and somebody to fix our hair and somebody to iron our clothes, because my mother was an independent woman. And yet, 200 years ago, the Supreme Court was saying women needed to stay home and have children and be a wife. George Sale, who was the dean of Yale's law school in the 1870s, said it's okay for women to attend law school as long as they're ugly. Now, it's not our fault that he can't control themselves, but that was stated. That's in the textbook. In 1964, 4% of the women of the people entering law school were women. By the 70s, it was up to 40%, and today women go to law school at a higher rate than men. Did discrimination just occur against women? No. Charlotte Ray was the first African-American woman to practice law in the United States, and she applied to Howard University, the school where Kamala Harris went as an undergrad. And she was slick. When she applied, she put her name down as C.R. Ray. And the men were stunned when she showed up that day and she was not a man. And just really questioned whether or not they should kick her out. So I'm not just saying that, these men just, no, it happened with black on black as well. And so they let her stay. And she was the first woman to be admitted to the bar, African-American woman, and she was admitted to the bar in Washington, D.C. So it happens across the board for women. So we attend law school at a higher rate. We graduate at a higher rate. How are we treated when we become lawyers? Well, 47% of people graduating from law school that actually graduate are women. This was in 2018. It's increased by 2021. 47% of associates, and this is data from the ABA, are women, but only 19% are equity partners. And an equity partner is somebody that actually comes to own some of the practice. So only 19% of us are equity partners. Only 20% of in-house attorneys in the Fortune 500 companies are women, 26%. 32% of the deans of law schools are women. Now remember, we go to college more often than men, and we graduate at just about equal numbers, but only 32% of us are deans of law schools. 27% of us are federal and state judges. Women lawyers earn 77.6% of what male lawyers earn. And the Equal Pay Act and the Lilly Ledbetter Pay Act hasn't fixed that. So have we come a long way? Yes, they no longer say we got to be ugly to come or hide the fact that we have a female name. So we've come a long way. One of the advantages of me being 64 is that I've seen a lot of change. But we can't go to sleep because more change needs to occur. The Florida Bar did a survey in 2017 in which they found out that 1 in 7 female lawyers in the state of Florida said that they had been sexually harassed within the last 3 years. I think about poor Anita Hill in 1991 during Clarence Thomas's hearings to be admitted to the U.S. Supreme Court. Have we come a long way? Yes. Look at how women are treated now with Governor Cuomo. So we've come a long way, but we have not arrived. Our textbook tells us that bullies are most often senior lawyers, and managing lawyers, when they were interviewed, 40% of them said they couldn't stop the bullying and harassment of women. I want to give you some quotes from our textbook as I get ready for the questioning section. These are quotes from the book. Women leave the partnership track far greater than men, mainly because of the difficulty of handling work and childcare. Despite federal laws prohibiting it, women are routinely asked questions about age, intention to have children, their relationship, tolerance for stress, and how they're going to work long hours. I always tell my female students, when you go to interview for a job, don't drive your minivan with the 3 car seats in the back. Rent a sports car. Women are treated differently from the beginning of their first contract. Listen to this one. Having children increases the likelihood of a man becoming partner because they know he's got bills to pay, but it decreases the likelihood for a woman. 71% of males in a law firm said they worked expanded hours because they didn't have to do their equal share of childcare duties. But women who worked expanded hours did not have partners that shared equally in childcare and housework. Female lawyers who are least stressed by the conflicting demands of home and work are those who are not married and don't have children. Many women have foregone marriage and motherhood because they saw the demands as irreconcilable. I will tell you, in my first job out of graduate school, when I was 21 years old, I was talking to my boss one day and she wasn't feeling well. And I said, well, you know, maybe you could be pregnant. And she said, there's no room for children in this profession. And that Friday, when she was not looking, I cleaned my desk out and didn't go back. That wasn't a professional thing to do, but I did it, and I could afford to do it. And I often wondered, what about a woman who could not afford to walk away from a job? When your boss says to you, a female boss, there's no room for children in this profession. So what was my advice to girls the first time I taught PPR? I really wrestled with it. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to address this, because if not me, then who? And I had a class of 70 students, and I thought, I'm going there. I didn't have tenure anyway, so, you know, what do I have to lose? I said, I'm going there, and I'm going to have a long discussion of this, even though it's the last chapter in the book. And at the end of the class, 5 girls were standing at the podium crying. And I said, what's the matter? They said, Professor, nobody has talked to us about this. All we've heard is you're going to have to work 80 to 90 hours as an associate. And so I went there. One of the things I do for all of my students is I have them do a visioning exercise to figure out where you want to be in 10 years. What does your family look like? What kind of work will you be doing? Because you need to be making decisions right now that will get you there. I say very honestly, choose your life partner very carefully, because he or she is probably on their best behavior right now. And if you don't see her wanting the things that you want, and I tell them, these are the tough things you got to decide about. Religion, how to handle money, whether you're going to have children, how you're going to raise the children, how are we going to get the house cleaned up? Because I tell them, if your children get poisoned by all the dirt in your house, you're going to get disbarred. The house has got to be cleaned up. I tell my students, if you can, get yourself some help. I will tell you, as a teacher, $50 a week to get some help changed my life. And it changed my life because I got mad at my husband one day going to a football game, and I decided I was going to go home. And I went to a phone booth and called my mother and said, I'm going to go home. Jimmy's mad, we're late, and he's mad. And my mother said, why are you late? I said, well, I was trying to get this done. She said, get somebody to help you. So for $50 a week, I'm probably still married today, because when the house is not clean, mama is not happy. Think about what you want your life to be like. And you need to always be visioning. I had my bridesmaids on the back of my bedroom door when I was in the 7th grade. And if my mother would talk to you today, she would tell you, other than the friends I picked up in high school, they were my bridesmaids. And my mother used to tell me, relax, enjoy. I'm like, nope, got things to figure out. But think about where you want to be. If you want to have children, and this is for the men and the women, but women, there's something, and you can look it up, called the mommy factor. Having children sometimes postpones some of the things you want to do in your career. And that is a fact. And I see some of my female students nodding their heads. You've got to plan for that. You've got to think about that. And you plan for it before you get married, because you're going to need help if you're going to have a career. We're different than men. Difference is not a detriment, but we're different. I tell my girls, if you're going to have a family, you need to be thinking about that pretty quick, because another way we differ is your ability to become a parent by natural means. So you've got to think about those things. I will tell you, my girls, my daughter and my daughter-in-law took me up on it, and both of them had 2 children while they were still in college seeking higher level degrees. But you know what? That's the way it goes. And so have we come a long way? We have come a long way. We have come a very long way. Have we arrived? No, we haven't. The next generation of women have work to do. We've got to make sure that we are participating in the political system in the United States. And we got 150 years to catch up, because we didn't get to participate for 150 years. We've got to think about how we're treated in the workplace with bullying, sexual harassment. We've got to demand equal pay for equal work. But as far as our issue, we've got to make decisions for our lives that will help us get to where we want to be. We can't make decisions that we know will put us behind and then try to figure out how am I going to catch up. Visualize where you want to be in 10 years and start making plans and decisions to get yourself there today. So we have come a long way. We have absolutely come a long way, but we have not arrived. Thank you.
You know, as obviously a husband and a father of 2 daughters who are professional women, as I was listening, and I wonder if our participants have been listening well, is the adjustments you have to make within the family structure. But I'm more interested, and we'll get into some of the questions on the chat in a second, is what's your take on how much women have to conform to the male power structure that we see still in law firms, in other industries? Lilly Ledbetter worked for Goodyear, if I remember correctly. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
And that's, I'm assuming at that time, and still is, a pretty male-dominated industry. But how much conformity has to happen? You made an offhanded comment about don't drive the van, drive the sports car. Is that conforming to a structure that women shouldn't have to? You know, so how do you balance that?
Well, I will tell you, Paul, I remember once I had to go to a meeting for my superintendent when I lived in Orlando, and a child had gotten killed and he couldn't go, and he sent for me to go. And I kind of pushed back a little bit because I was further down the org chart. And when he told me you're going, which is fine, I know him, he's married to my sorority sister. He said, and you will be the only African-American person in the room and the only female. And I said, okay. And he said, and be nice. How much do you have to conform? These things have to happen. You have to work hard. You have to produce. I never want to give my boss a reason to think that I'm going to do less work. I want to give my creativity. I want to make sure that I show up, that I'm appropriately dressed. And my girls know I talk about this all the time, that I'm there on time and there's nothing I can't do. Now, that means I have to make sure that my children are taken care of. And so, do I conform at work? Do I expect to be treated any less? No. but I've got to take care of home. I've got to arrange it. It starts with, and I'm going to say this again, it starts with who you marry. Watch your significant other's home life. Does mom do all the work and dad sit in front of the television? Or are they both operating in a partnership? That is very important. I will tell people, my mother and father were in college at the same time, and my dad was in Selma. And he would come home on the weekends and he would start cleaning at the front door. Because 6 of us used one bathroom for most of our lives until I was in middle school, my daddy mopped the bathroom floor every day. So do I have to conform at work? If conforming means produce as much as men, the answer is yes. Do I have to lose my femininity and forget that I'm a female? Absolutely not. One of the things I tell my girls is, if an off-color joke is told at work, if you grin, you're in. If you grin, you're in. When I hear something I don't like, the first time I give you a stern face. The next time I ask you, please don't say that in my presence. The next time I say, I'm going to report you to HR and I'm HR. So I feel like I do any less work. In fact, my goal is to do more work, to be more creative, to show up. But I don't pretend to think that I'm a part of the male group, because I don't want to hear the things they're talking about. You're not going to step over the line with saying inappropriate things to me or in my presence. Gotcha. But in order to do that, I've got to take care of my children and my home and my husband, because that is a priority for me.
I got to ask this other question that before we even started today, it's been going through my mind, anticipating for this session. We see what's going on right now with HR 1 and S1 voter rights and the John Lewis Voter Rights Act. And then you look back at the mid to late 18th, early 19th, late 19th, early 20th century of the suffrage movement. Do you see parallels here? And what will we learn from the suffrage movement that might serve us well in our current environment that our Congress is dealing? And or are they apples and oranges in your mind?
Well, I will tell you, I've got another boring article entitled Voter Suppression, a Recent Phenomena or an American Legacy. And it's being published by the University of Baltimore Law Review within the month.
Congrats.
And basically, we need to understand that we have had a history of, if I don't get my way in an election, then I'm going to pass laws to make sure I do. And if I don't get my way, then I'm going to pass laws to make sure I do. We talk about being the democracy giant of the world. And Jimmy Carter, with his organization, goes all over the world ensuring fair elections. We have never been a country that promoted universal suffrage. And we probably got as close to it as we could with the recent presidential election. More people turned out than ever before. And so what I would say is, when you win, you don't take your foot off the accelerator. Because if you do, somebody's going to siphon all the gas out of your tank. We've got work to do. Why is it took so long for a woman to become, to ascend to the high executive office as vice president? Because as women, we don't participate. We don't vote things that will benefit our children. Childcare, good lunches for them at school, healthcare. And so I would present to you, Paul, that this is just a cyclical thing that happens every time the group doesn't win.
Get their way.
And if you read my article, again, if you have trouble going to sleep with daylight savings time, shoot me an email and I'll send you the link. You will see that this is an ongoing history. American legacy or recent phenomena, this is our American legacy. Now, we saw some dramatic things happen this time, but this has been our American legacy. I remember I went on a tour with my husband to Washington, D.C., and we got into the National Archives. Our congressman helped us get there, up in the upstairs part of the National Archives. And so the man said, it was a personal one-on-one tour. He said, tell me some things you want to see some documents for. And I said, well, let me see the first draft of FDR's this day will go down in infamy. So he did. So I asked several things. I wanted to see some of the congressional hearings on the assassination of Martin Luther King. I saw George Washington's first roll call after the American Revolution. And my hand started to jitter, and my husband said, sit on your hand so you don't touch that stuff when you act in federal prison.
Did you have the white gloves on?
Things, yeah, he had on some gloves. And but one of the things I asked for was to see some of the initial women's suffrage discussions. And one of the congressmen in the Senate said, we should not allow women to vote because it's going to institutionalize nagging. I got so mad, my husband said, I agree with him, and I stomped his foot, okay? If we allow women, that was in 1919. If we allow women to vote, it will institutionalize nagging. And you talk about voter suppression?
There's a question in the chat from Professor Martin Scott about why did you choose the law? You're heavy duty in education. Obviously, you're a law professor now, so you've kind of made it. But what was the transition about for you?
I knew that I was going to get a doctorate in something because my goal was to teach in higher education after I exited the Florida retirement system. I was going to get a doctorate in education, and I heard that Jeb Bush was reopening Florida A&M's law school that was taken away from them during segregation, but he could not put it back in Tallahassee because Tallahassee already had Florida State. So he decided to put it in Orlando. It was 4 blocks from my office, and I knew I wouldn't have to drive through Disney traffic to get to working on a doctorate. And that's the honest truth. But I also knew I can get a law degree, and that will put me in a whole different realm because I wanted to become an assistant superintendent at the end of my career. My sister that's watching is working on her doctorate, and she's about ready to retire. And so I knew I wanted to enter into higher education. I love the art of teaching. I love watching young people get highly educated, and in the words of my late father, live decent and in order. So I knew I was going to teach at the college level, and I knew a law degree would give me that one final promotion as to an assistant superintendent quickly, and then afford me the opportunity to teach. And for years, for almost 10 years, I taught in the ed leadership programs at the University of South Florida and at St. Leo. And I had the privilege to be able to teach at Cooley. But my ultimate goal was to teach in higher education because I love to teach.
Interesting. And people are giving you props. They say you're an exceptional teacher. What makes you exceptional, do you think, in the eyes of your students?
Well, I will tell you this. I wasn't a lawyer that learned to be a teacher. I was a teacher that learned to be a lawyer. I was supervisor of teacher training for the district in charge of training programs for 9,000 teachers. And I wrote programs that were adopted by the Florida Department of Education and the U.S. Department of Education. George Bush gave me $6 million in grants to train teachers, people with 4-year degrees, to train teachers, to train 4-year degree people to become teachers without going back to college. And so I love to train young people to be teachers.
I don't know if you want to go here, but
I go there. I'll go there.
Well, let's talk about Andrew Cuomo a little bit. There's been a, depending upon whom you're listening to and talking to and reading, there are 2 schools of thought that because the women have come forward, he should leave his position. Others are advocating for the process to take its course. From a women's rights perspective, is there a better way? Is there a best way to handle this?
Let me share something with you that I didn't share with my husband until the Me Too movement came along. The other reason I quit my job with a municipality was I was put in charge. I was in employee relations, and oddly enough, I retired in charge of employee relations for the school system. That's the people that fire people. I was assigned to the sanitation department. And the sanitation department sat catty corner to One Buck Place where my husband was working. I would pull up to the sanitation department with my director And those garbage men would say horrible things to me. I was 22 years old, 21 years old, horrible things. Not one time did my male director defend me. And I often thought if my husband walked out of One Buck Place right now, he would kill somebody. I didn't tell him about that until the Me Too movement came along. That was really the primary reason I left that job. That and my boss, the boss under him told me I couldn't have children and work that job. And so if you've ever been harassed or bullied in the workplace, it is very intimidating. Now, in my case, I didn't need the job to feed my children. And I wondered for over 40 years how women survived if they needed a job to really, really exist. I think they need to let it play out, but I think they need to give those women a fair hearing. So some people will ask, well, why didn't they come forward? I didn't come forward to my own husband for almost 40 years. There's something demeaning about being in a workplace and being harassed by men for women. And that's why I tell my female students, don't smile. If you smile at that first off-color thing that's said to you, that's a green light that says, go. If you give a stern look, that's the red light that says, she doesn't think this is funny. And I mean, I give a real ugly face when I hear things that shouldn't be said in the presence of women in the workplace. True story. We were sitting at the table one day talking at Cooley, and we were talking about shopping for underwear. And Jeff Martley walked up and he said, and we stopped talking. And he said, why'd y'all stop talking? Y'all talking about me? And I said, no, I was doing the talking, of course, because I talk a lot. He said, were y'all talking about me? I said, no. He said, well, why'd you stop talking? I said, there's some things I don't say in mixed company. And he said, well, that's an old-fashioned term. I said, that's fine, because I'm an old-fashioned girl. And so it's hard when you're that woman and you need that job. But I tell my female students, don't smile. Don't smile. If you grin, you're in. And so, yes, he needs to be given his due process. He needs to be given a fair hearing. But whether or not the man gets a fair hearing is not always the issue. If you really dig into the Anita Hill, Clarence Thomas hearings, there was an understory that was not being told. And she was too embarrassed to tell it. And then she started to feel pressure from him. But I've talked to people that knew them, and I said, what was going on there? And they said, oh, there were other things that she would not speak of in the hearing. And so, yes, men and women need to be given their due process, but everybody needs to be given a fair hearing. So with those women, people need to listen. And when Governor Cuomo replies, people need to listen and let the system, but there's a bigger issue here. The state of New York cannot go on pause while he's taking care of this. They are in a critical situation, and he needs to govern daily. So this cannot become the focus of his life. So we got to ask ourselves, at what point is he ineffective in the middle of a pandemic, mass unemployment, all kinds of crises going on, and now he's got to address this issue.
Let's talk, we're coming close to the end of our time, but let's talk about equal pay for a little bit. So you identified that the legal profession, there are more women that are coming into the legal profession than men. Certainly we're experiencing the same thing here at this law school. Is it just a matter of time that women will ascend to higher level positions, decision-making decisions that would ameliorate any equal pay issue, at least in the legal profession? Or do you think that's too rose-colored in my perspective? How do you think this plays itself out within the profession that we're in?
First of all, Paul, I am an eternal optimist. I have to be, because I have no other choice. I believe that until women exercise their political power, they won't get, that's why I talked about our political position in this country first. Until we are exercising our political power, until we vote our interests, nothing is going to change. I don't want to stand there and say, please, please, please help me. I want to control my ability to get help. And so women have got to get out and vote. Women have got to be there when child care legislation is passed. Women have got to be there when things like the Lilly Ledbetter Act was passed. One of the things I say in the article about the failure of gender pay initiatives in the United States is that the greatest ally of unequal pay is secrecy.
Yes,
It's secrecy.
Yeah.
Lilly Ledbetter did not know she was underpaid until she retired. She made $3,000 and some change, and a kid that was just hired was making over $4,000 a month. She didn't know that. And many times people, I work for an institution that we have broad public records laws in Florida. And so we knew what everybody was making, but we had to fill out an equity report for the U.S. Department of Education every year. And in that report, we had to determine how many men were high school principals, because what we know is high school principals earn more. Not only do they earn more, that's typically where assistant superintendents and superintendents come from. And so if we had a population with 50% female, we could not be more than 5% out of line. We had to have at least 45% female high school principals. See, that's what transparency will do for you. As a result, we have many female superintendents, have had female superintendents in Hillsborough, and I work for a female superintendent. That's what transparency will do for you. And as long as we keep it a secret, we have no idea that we're underpaid. We're just thankful to be there. But again, think about what losing 20% or being paid 20% less will do to your lifestyle.
Absolutely.
And women face that every day. So we've got to show up politically. We've got to show up politically, and we've got to have access to information.
Okay. We have a few questions flying in here. Do you think that the current feminist revolts fulfill their advocacy role on women's rights and social awareness? So are the feminist revolts challenges aligning well with advancing women's rights?
With the feminist what now?
Revolts, protesting, identifying behavior.
I will tell you that I believe in marching and protesting. I've marched in the middle of a pandemic. My daddy marched. We protested, because you've got to bring attention to what's going on. But just marching and protesting is not enough. You've got to have a strategy. One of the things my dad used to do is he used to go to Montgomery on Wednesdays to study under Martin Luther King to learn strategies for peaceful protesting and peaceful change. But you've got to have a strategy. Protesting brings attention, but you've got to go beyond attention. You've got to let politicians know, I don't like what you did to women in the last piece of legislation, and we're coming after you. And guess what? We're 51% of the population. So protesting brings attention, but you've got to have strategy in order to bring change.
Related question, what do you say to those people who say that childbearing rearing creates a setback for women, and then that promotes the likelihood of lower pay?
Absolutely not.
Okay, expand.
First of all, I think it's one of the best things that ever happened to us for us to be able to have children. When my daughter got pregnant, my husband said to me one day, "Can I ask you a question?" I said, "What?" He said, "You know, you used to really kind of be hard on the kids. I bought them cars and gave them pizza when you wanted them to have baked chicken. And I'm the fun parent. And every time they call and there's a problem, he'll go, Dwayne, is anything wrong? No, I'm fine. Can I speak to mom?" And when I get on the phone, he goes, "Mom, get her." And he says, "Why do they do that?" And I said, "It's a secret that women don't share with y'all." So no, I don't think that bearing children puts us back. I think bearing children puts us in charge. Because guess what? Joe Biden had a mom. Barack Obama had a mom. And most children will go straight past dad to get to mom when they're in trouble. So I think it's a privilege in order to be able to have children. Now, I will tell you this. When I took off with my children, I took off 2 years with each child, I was told, you'll never get your career back on track. I was told that. And guess what? I stomped right past all of those people. So hard work, creativity, and determination, it doesn't make me less of an employee because I have children. In fact, I work harder because I have children.
Mm-hmm. We have a question about the movement in Georgia to get powerful companies to fight the voter suppression legislation that is being pushed. And interestingly, we're at the school, we're anticipating working with Coca-Cola. But what are your thoughts on this? Coca-Cola is one of the main companies being called out on this, and they just recently came out with a statement. I think my colleague Jackie Freeman brought it to our attention, or someone did, that they are now created some internal rules to make sure that their securing of legal services would be more representative than they previously had been.
I think that when you boycott companies that mistreat you, that is a good, peaceful way to protest. I think it's a great thing. We need to look at where we spend our dollars. We need to ask ourselves, how do they treat their employees? How do they treat their men? Do they give people a living wage? That's the power of protest, when you look at how people are treated and decide. And you know what? They may never know that I don't go in their store, but I'm going to make a stance for myself with where I spend my dollars based on how people treat their employees. So I think that's a good thing. And listen, if you want to get a company to do right, publicize what they do wrong. I think about with social media today, and I always get this wrong, and my students correct me. One of the Kardashian girls said that either Instagram or Snapchat was like a has-been. That day they lost almost $1 billion in stocks. She just put that out on social media. So we have a powerful voice today with social media.
Yeah.
You don't have to buy a commercial. You can put on social media what somebody has done or they do with their employees. Now, make sure it's true so you don't get sued for defamation. But I think that's a good thing. We live in a time today where you don't have to hope for a spot on the news. You can create your own news about what people do. And that is a powerful, powerful tool to get people to remedy injustice.
So we have about 5 minutes left, if that. Any closing comments you want to leave our guests today?
I want to leave with the fact that, again, I don't do this as a pessimist. I do this as an optimist. I can remember as a little girl going to the state fair and seeing signs that said colored and white. I've lived long enough to see major change. Change is not linear. You'll take 1 step forward, 2 steps back, 3 steps forward, a half step back, and it takes patience and diligence. Change doesn't occur with a flash in the pan. I'm here today and then I'm gone. No, we've got to stay on it. We've got to have that consistent message. But I will tell you, if I had the opportunity to live any place else and any other day, it would be now, and it would be in the United States. But we have got to understand that we've come a long way. We've come a long way. During my lifetime, we were 4% of the students in law school. We're over 50%. Guys, that's major progress. And I believe that my daughter will live in a different world than I live in. My 4 granddaughters will live in a different world than I live in. My grandsons, my 2 grandsons will live in a different world. And I think it's going to be a better world. But it will only be a better world if we show up and push the envelope at all times.
Well, we thank you so much, Professor DuBose, for being with us today with this excellent conversation. We thank all of our participants, obviously, and we hope you'll join us next month when we'll have Judge Rosemarie Equilina joining us. At the end of the session today, you'll receive a short survey. We ask that you take a moment to complete that. And until next time, we please stay safe. Let's keep pushing and clear away this virus, and let's take care of one another. Have a great rest of the day, everybody. Take care.